If you have a TIAA traditional annuity, you've probably wondered, what are my options when it's time to take my money out for retirement? Today I'm going to break down the four main payout choices in simple terms so you can see which one might fit your retirement goals. And then I'll finish by talking about the option that I believe is most overlooked and underutilized by real retirees. But let me first say this. Retirement planning decisions are complex, and especially when they involve TIAA Traditional. It is a very unique product specific to their 403(b) accounts. So while this video does touch on some of the options available, it's very important to align those options with the rest of your financial plan. Like, what other income sources will you rely on? What are the timing of those income sources? What is your risk tolerance? What's your risk capacity? What are your legacy goals? What are your liquidity needs? And so much more. If you want a second set of eyes on this whole retirement planning picture, feel free to check out our website at www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or you can start with the Retirement Readiness Questionnaire that is linked in the description. We'd love to learn more about you and see how we can help you in your retirement planning journey. So I spent 6 years working at TIAA and had an absolutely phenomenal experience, but I have since launched my own independent financial planning firm specializing in retirement planning. And so I just say that to sort of emphasize the fact that in no way, shape, or form did TIAA compensate me or tell me to do this video. I am not affiliated with TIAA in any way, shape, or form, other than we have a long family history of TIAA participants. My great uncle was a professor at Catholic University. He was a TIAA participant for 50 plus years. When my dad went to go work at his not-for-profit organization, he had two options, TIAA or Fidelity. And of course, his uncle told him, you know what, you've got to sign up with TIAA. They've done me very, very well over the course of my career. So my dad has been a TIAA participant for multiple decades, and I am now a TIAA participant as well, having worked there in the wealth management division for 6 years. But I will say TIAA is one of the most complicated products out there in the market. In general, annuities are very complicated. But what I want to do in this video is try to simplify these as much as possible in hopes that you can make the best decision with your retirement plan. What I'll also say, there are many different types of contracts for TIAA Traditional. There are old contracts, there are new contracts, there are liquid contracts, there are illiquid contracts. So I recognize that each of you might have some unique circumstances related to your affiliation with TIAA, and that all of these may not apply to you. But in general, we have four options for TIAA Traditional in terms of pulling the funds out. And when I say a TIAA Traditional, I'm talking about the fixed annuity portion of your 403(b) accounts. There are also variable annuities inside of these 403(b) contracts. CREF stock, CREF growth, CREF bond. These are all investment options that are actually variable annuities, which simply means it gives you the option to turn that asset into a lifetime income when you get to retirement. TIAA Traditional is no different, other than how you make money on the TIAA is not tied to market volatility, but more so tied to the participation and the performance of TIAA's general portfolio. So there are four options to take money out of TIAA on the back end. The first option is, to simplify it, is called the RMD option, also known as the MDO option. So RMD stands for Required Minimum Distribution. This is the time when the IRS says, you know what, I want to get my paycheck. You've been deferring these taxes for decades. I want to get paid. So back in the day, it used to be 70 and a half. That was the magic age when you started to take required minimum distributions out. And if you didn't, you got slapped with a 50% tax penalty. You don't want to do that. So therefore, you at least satisfy those required minimum distributions, or potentially more if your income needs are over and above that. With the Secure Act 1.0 passing back in 2019, then the RMD age got pushed to 72, and then it since got pushed out to 73 or 75, depending on your year of birth. If you were born 1960 or later, your minimum distribution option, or your required minimum distribution date, I should say, begins at age 75. MDO stands for Minimum Distribution Option. Number two, the option is take out the interest only from the account. So whatever the crediting rate is, that's what you're going to take out as a distribution from that particular asset class. The third option is to turn it into a life income stream, or in other words, annuitize the asset. And then number four is transfer, rollover, or liquidate. Essentially, you want to get out of that particular fund. You want to move it to your own IRA. You want to move it out of there. You want to liquidate the funds. So we're going to go over these four main options. And then again, hopefully that helps you in your retirement planning journey. So let's start with the RMD or the MDO option. Again, required minimum distribution or minimum distribution option. TIAA, I believe they still call it the minimum distribution option, but for those of you that are not familiar with that, just think of it as they essentially calculate your RMD, and it's based on your life expectancy table. Most of you will follow this uniform lifetime table, okay? And essentially your life expectancy factor is affiliated with your age that you turn in that particular year. So as an example, if you turn 75 in 2025, your life expectancy factor is 24.6. So what you do is you divide your account balance by that life expectancy factor, and that determines the amount of income that you have to take out of the portfolio. Otherwise, you get hit, not with the 50% tax penalty, but now a 25% penalty. Still very steep, so you still want to make sure you follow those rules. So just for fun, if you had $1 million inside of the TIAA Traditional and you flipped that account into a required minimum distribution or an MDO contract, you are now required to take out 1 million divided by 24.6, or in other words, $40,650, which is roughly 4% of the portfolio balance. And as you can see, each year that goes by, your life expectancy factor goes down. By the time you get to 90, your life expectancy factor is 12.2. So if you take that same $1 million at 90 and you divide that into 12.2, the income you take out that year is $81,967. Basically double than what you started taking out when you were 75. This is what I like to call the tax trap of RMDs. If you're in a situation where maybe you have nice Social Security payments and a nice pension, and you're not going to need a lot of these assets in these tax-deferred vehicles, you plan on letting them continue to grow tax-deferred and leave them to your heirs, well, over time, those RMDs continue to go up, which could potentially trigger some unnecessary taxes. So you really want to be careful with this. If you have these large tax-deferred balances that you may not rely on solely for income because you have other assets and other income sources, you want to come up with a plan, particularly before you hit that required minimum distribution age. But in this situation, if you're, let's say, 60 or 62, you can, in theory, let that account continue to grow and compound, and you don't have to do anything. You're not forced to turn this account into anything or move it. You can leave it inside of your 403b. You can roll it over to your IRA, which we'll talk about in option number 4, but you can just let this thing cook and compound, and when you're ready to take out income, then you can turn on one of these options. In this case, you have to be RMD age. You have to be either 73 or 75. That is the year in which you can begin this minimum distribution option, which is number 1. Option 2 is what we call interest only. So essentially, each of your accounts, each of your TI Traditional accounts is going to have an affiliated interest rate associated with it. And it depends on your contribution year. So contributions that you were making, let's say in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, those have a much higher interest rate than contributions that you made, let's say, in 2015 or 2020 or 2025, because interest rates post-2009 really went down to essentially 0% after the Great Recession. So ultimately, interest rates with TI Traditional also went down, but ultimately, what you can do in these contracts is you can take out your interest, meaning you can leave your principal intact and just take out that interest and use that interest as income. Now, of course, just like the minimum distribution option, when that income comes out of the portfolio, then it's going to be taxable to you. So if you don't need the income, interest only probably doesn't make sense. It probably makes sense for you to continue to grow that account tax deferred and either implement Roth conversions, roll the funds out of the account, or one of the other options that we'll talk about here in just a second. But interest only is a great option if you need some supplemental income. Maybe you've got Social Security, maybe you have a small pension, or maybe you don't have a pension, and maybe you need to rely on your assets for the bulk or at least part of your retirement income. Well, you may want to take some distributions out of your variable investments, but you could also supplement that with taking out income with this particular fixed annuity. And in this case, you can leave the principal intact and take out whatever interest that your account is crediting. What I actually have here on the whiteboard is an existing client who has TI Traditional, and it actually illustrates what the interest rate is based on the type of the contract that she has. And as you can see, she has RA and GRA and also SRA and GSRA. I mentioned there are different contracts that are associated with each of your plans, and some are going to have different rules and they're going to have different interest rates associated with it. But the simple way to think about this, at least with these older contracts, I know they have some newer plans as well, so that's not going to apply, but these older contracts that have been around, let's say 8 years plus, we'll call it, and we're doing this video in 2025. So each of these contracts are going to be associated with the GRA, RA, or the SRA, GSRA. So if you see an S in one of these contracts, that stands for supplemental. And essentially this means this account is liquid. This TIAA Traditional is fully liquid. So you can take out that TI Traditional in a lump sum if you wanted to, and you could do whatever you wanted to, or you can take all those funds out and roll it to your own IRA. If it does not have an S in the contract, that is not a liquid contract. That's going to be these RAs or GRAs. And really, the reason that is because the S contracts, these are supplemental contracts that are mostly, if not all, contributions coming from you, the employee. So contributions that you made into TI Traditional, you have access to at any point in time, whereas contracts that are not supplemental, meaning they're required based on your employment, some sort of agreement with the state, or some sort of pension program that you were involved with, they are required to put in a certain percentage. Those required contributions go into these retirement annuities right here, this first column, and as a result, there is less liquidity, but the interest rate is higher, evidenced by this column being greater than this column in all of these scenarios. So again, higher interest rates, less liquidity for those illiquid contracts, and then the liquid contracts have a slightly lower interest rate, but they are fully liquid, which is nice. So let's say hypothetically you have $1 million inside of the TIAA Traditional, and let's say your combined interest rate, because you're going to have multiple tranches based on when those contribution sources came in, let's say the interest rate is about 4.5%. So at $1 million at 4.5%, that interest that it's generating is roughly $45,000 on an annual basis. So with the interest-only option, you could essentially tell TIAA, sign the contract and say, pay out my interest every year, every quarter, twice a year, once a month. I believe those are all options at your disposal. So if you want to manage cash flow monthly, you can set it up that way. If you wanted to have a one-time payment and that pays for your European vacation, do it that way as well. But the interest-only option is a great way to preserve that principal and actually use the money that you've worked so hard to build up and create by taking out the interest and using that as cash flow. Now, of course, that $45,000, just like the required minimum distribution option, that will be a taxable distribution to you for that particular year it came out. And with interest only, I believe there are rules in terms of how frequent you can start and stop these contracts. I don't think it's something that you can just kind of flip on and off all the time. I think there are some limitations there so speak with your TIA representative or call TI directly to figure out what those options are for your particular contract and their particular plan rules. Okay, option number 3 is to annuitize the contract, or in other words, turn it into a life income stream. So with this option, unlike the interest-only option where you preserve principal, in the annuitization option, you're actually exchanging your account balance for an income payment that you will never outlive, or even you or your spouse will outlive if you're married and you want to add a beneficiary to that particular contract, or a joint annuitant for that particular contract. So I have on the screen here an actual client who requested an annuitization illustration from TIAA. So this is really your first step if you're interested in this option, is to call them and request an illustration. Say, hey, based on all of my TIAA contracts, okay, I have some different contribution periods that have different interest rates associated with it. They will also have the payout rates listed as well. So the difference between the interest rate and the payout rate is the interest rate is you get when you're in the accumulation phase. The payout rate is what you receive when you turn that contract into a life income stream. So again, you're exchanging that balance, and it doesn't have to be the whole thing. You can, let's say you have $1 million portfolio inside of TIAA Traditional. You could say, hey, $500,000, I'm going to put it inside of this fixed annuity, this lifetime income stream, this annuitization option, and then in exchange, I'm going to get an income payout for the rest of my life, or the rest of my life and my spouse, and then the other $500,000, I'm going to leave it just accumulating interest, or turn on that minimum distribution option, or turn on that interest-only option, or do something different with it, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But here, which was pretty cool, is it actually laid out a lifetime income payout rate for this particular client who's 67 with the 10-year guarantee. The 10-year guarantee comes into play if you select this option and you pass away within that 10 years. So when you're alive, the income is going to continue forever. But that's the gamble. You're betting on longevity when you choose this particular option. But if you pass away early, in this case 10 years, the income will at least continue for that long. So if you pass away after 5 years, hypothetically, and you have this 10-year guaranteed payout option, the income stream will at least continue for 5 years. Most of the time, it'll be for some other beneficiary, like an adult child or someone else. Maybe it's a sibling. Okay. So the hedge here is you're buying insurance just in case you did die early, because again, you're betting on longevity. This option over here illustrates, on the far right-hand side, actually illustrates a joint life and survivor with a 20-year guarantee, hypothetically. So it just kind of shows you how it impacts the payout rate. Okay. So these are the payout rates. With this particular client that we work with, she has payout contracts from the 2024 band, 2022 to 2023, and so on and so forth, all the way dating back to pre-2006, which look at that. 10.1% is her payout rate on those particular contracts if she were to annuitize. Okay, but the joint life with the 20-year guarantee is basically saying, not only do I want you to pay me while I'm living, but also while my spouse is living, or an adult child, hypothetically. So as you can see, it'll reduce the payout rate quite dramatically, and that 20-year guarantee comes into play with a joint life if both of you were to pass away, both the joint annuitants within that period. So let's say, mom and dad set up a joint life annuity. Okay, so it's going to pay them for as long as they live. But if they were to pass away within 20 years, the payments will at least continue for that long for their adult child, Johnny, hypothetically. Okay, so let's say after 10 years, mom and dad passed away in a freak car accident. Well, there's 10 more years left on that 20-year guarantee period, so those payments will continue for at least 10 more years, or for 10 more years for their adult child, Johnny. Okay? But what's cool is then it will also illustrate the combined payout rate. So in this option, just to sort of, spoiler alert with this particular client, they chose the single life payout with a 10-year guarantee period, which is going to give her a payout rate of 8.81%. It's probably a little bit hard to read that because it's a little bit blurry. These are scanned documents, but it's going to pay her 8.81% as a payout rate. Okay, so just to use simple numbers here. Let's say you had $1 million that you were going to turn into a life annuity at an 8.81% payout rate. That's $88,100 on an annual basis for as long as you live. Now, these are not designed to keep pace with inflation, these baseline quotes. However, they oftentimes do go up with inflation. So it's not guaranteed in the contract, but with TIAA, they do pay. They're very strong. I mean, I think they are the godfather of annuities. So I believe they have increased payout rates, not going to say every year, but quite often to where it does keep pace with inflation quite nicely, even if you choose that fixed annuity option, this TIAA Traditional fixed annuity. So that's option 3, is to annuitize the portfolio. You're obviously giving up liquidity though. So that $1 million that you turned into an annuity is no longer on your balance sheet. It's now turned into this payout rate, which then spins off that income on an annual basis. So you better be sure you have other assets that can serve as that liquidity buffer. Maybe it's a taxable brokerage account. Maybe it's an IRA, or maybe it's money inside of your 401k and 403b account that is liquid. Okay. Home equity, I wouldn't really say that that's a 100% liquid asset, although you can use some sort of reverse mortgage and use that emergency fund option, or even a home equity line of credit. So you can have an emergency fund baked in, or even cash on hand, but you can't have an emergency fund baked into your home as a backdrop. But I would say if you're going to annuitize your portfolio, you don't want to get too aggressive and annuitize too much of your portfolio, because just in case an emergency popped up, or just in case your health profile changed, you don't want to be locked into that decision. This is an irrevocable decision that you can never change this. Interest only, you can change that. You can turn that off. MDO option, you can change that. You can change it to an annuity later on. You can change it into interest only later on. Okay, annuitization, that's irrevocable. Okay, last but not least, you can roll over or liquidate that TIAA Traditional contract. Now, what I mentioned earlier, we were talking a little about the SRA and the GSRA. Okay, these are 100% liquid. So you don't have to worry about any liquidity restrictions. If you said, you know what, I'm done with TI Traditional, it's confusing me my whole career, I want to just get it out, I want to move it to my own IRA, that TIAA Traditional that's inside of one of these contracts, and there are new ones as well. So I think the new one, don't quote me on this, it's been a little while since I've worked for TIA, but I think they're called the RCP contracts, okay? These are also liquid where you can move that into your own IRA without any liquidity restrictions. And again, we're just talking about TIAA Traditional. The other funds in there, you might even have Vanguard funds in there, or T. Rowe Price funds, or CREF funds, or Nuveen funds inside of our 403B accounts. Those are fully liquid. We're just talking about the TI Traditional. If it's in one of those contracts, fully liquid. If it's in one of these contracts, RA, GRA, RC, I believe those are the main ones. If it's in one of these contracts, you're going to have some liquidity restrictions. It's not 100% liquid, okay? So I'm going to just use an example for these older contracts, these RA contracts, probably paying you the highest interest rate in your portfolio. So, looking at the, the illustration before this, the majority of that client's funds were inside of the RA contracts. So that's why her payout rate was so nice, 8.81%. Okay, there were probably a lot in those RA contracts. Okay, however, if you were like, you know what, I don't care what my interest rate is, I want to get it out of there as quickly as possible, either roll it into your own IRA, roll it into a different investment within the 403B, or even just cash it out, you can do what's called a TPA, or a transfer payout annuity. And essentially this is 10 equal payments, so 10 payments over 9 years. Okay, because year one is essentially year zero. So 0 through 9, you get an equal installment payment from these particular contracts, and they do kind of vary year to year because the interest rates can change over time, but they're pretty dialed in, and you're going to get 10 equal payments from that transfer payout annuity. If you elected that TPA to cash, meaning they paid that TPA to your bank account, that's obviously going to be a taxable distribution every time that TPA hits your account on an annual basis. If you're TPAing the contract to another IRA, there is no tax consequence. That's actually a rollover. You're basically going to have 10 rollovers over the course of 9 years. So again, if it's very important for you to get out of that particular fund, you want to just be done with the TI Traditional, you can do 10 equal installments over the course of 9 years into your IRA or another 401k if they allow it, or another 403B if they allow it. Okay. The GRAs, I believe there's a 5-year. Okay, there's a 5-year payout. And then the RC contracts, don't quote me on this again, I think it's a 7-year term, okay? But each of these e-liquid contracts has their own rules, their own plan rules. So call TIA, call your representative, ask them what those liquidity restrictions are, okay? But again, just kind of know that you may have multiple contracts within TIA, because typically your employment, you're going to have supplemental contributions, and then you're going to have required contributions that are oftentimes funded pretty heavily with the employer. Those employer contributions are going to be going into these e-liquid contracts. So what is the most overlooked option? Okay, I worked at TI for 6 years. I had hundreds of meetings, thousands of conversations with real retirees, both folks that were on the brink of retirement and even folks that have been retired for many, many years and even decades. And what I found is that in general, not even just TI participants, but in general, the mass public, just the word annuity sometimes makes people cringe. And I think the reasons are valid. I think for the most part, yes, you have a lot of big talking heads out there like a Ken Fisher who are just totally anti-annuity. But I think in general, the reason there's this distrust is because of how these annuities are sold in the marketplace. There are a lot of these insurance salesmen that are just out there pitching these annuity products, taking advantage of seniors, taking advantage of retirees, and they're just looking for the big payout. They're looking for that upfront commission, and they can be done with it. They have no fiduciary standard. They have no cares in terms of the long-term, satisfaction or viability for that particular retiree. They just want to get paid and move on to the next sale. I think this has tainted the annuity industry as a whole. Okay. But what I'd say is not all annuities are bad, and not all people selling annuities are bad. And in fact, I'm actually a big fan of annuities in the context of an overall financial plan. And what I see very often, especially when I worked at TIA, people were really going after this option here. Option number 4, they were fed up with the complexity of TIA. They just want to get their funds out, give me the transfer payout annuity, liquidate my TI Traditional, let me move it to my own IRA because I'd rather invest in what I can invest in. Okay, so what I'd say is this may not be in the best interest of your long-term retirement plan. In fact, when I'm working with retirees that have TI Traditional, I'm actually excited that they have TI Traditional because I know it can be utilized as a bond alternative. If you think back over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, how have bonds been performing? Not very well, okay? We're talking less than 2% a year on rate of return, and we've experienced significant volatility on the downside. The nice thing about these TI Traditional products, they can never go down in value. There is a minimum floor interest rate on an annual basis that it has to increase by, and typically those minimum interest rates are at least 3%, but most of them are paying 4.5% or more in annual interest. So why not use that as the bond portfolio or a portion of the bond portfolio if it's available, and therefore we can be a little bit more aggressive with the IRA and reduce our exposure into bonds. But what I see is many folks are just rushing into number 4 because they're just fed up with the liquidity issues and they just don't understand it truthfully. Or maybe they're working with an advisor that's trying to hawk all their assets. They want to move all their assets out of their retirement accounts and get it all into their management so they can charge them 1% to 2%. Okay, and I'm telling you, if you have TI Traditional, this could absolutely be a little bit of a silver bullet in your retirement plan. So do not sleep on this one. So let me get to the option that is most underutilized and overlooked is by far option number 3, annuitization, because of all the reasons I just mentioned. They're fed up with the complexity of annuities. They don't trust annuities. They don't trust the people selling annuities, and they just want to rush to get the funds out of there, not realizing, hey, this could actually serve as a baseline of your income stream in retirement, that additional layer on top of Social Security that many folks are missing these days, i.e. from a pension. Back in the day, people retire. They have the 3-legged stool. They have their Social Security payment, their pension, and then their investments. Now it's pretty much Social Security and investments. But if you have TI Traditional as part of your investments, looking back at those payout rates, 8.1%, very difficult to go out and replicate those types of returns in terms of a payout rate in the open market, not only in stocks and bonds, but also in annuities. Going out and buying a private annuity today, interest rates are coming down, okay, because these cost of annuities are going up because the mortality and expense charges are going up because people are living so much longer. So these actuaries are getting smart. They have been smart for many, many decades, but they're coming to grips with the fact that longevity is a concern for a lot of these carriers that are paying out these lifetime annuity payments. But TIAA is one of the best in the business at these contracts. They've been around for 150 plus years. They understand longevity. They understand the value of the long-term performance of their TI Traditional account, and they do a great job of managing risk in their portfolio. So I think by far the annuitization option is the most overlooked and underutilized. And again, when I'm thinking about the context of an overall financial plan, why not use that 8.81% payout rate? It puts less pressure on your investment portfolio, so you can be a little bit more aggressive with your stock investments, and you can capture some of the upside in your stock investments, knowing that you're not going to need to rely on those stock investments for as much income had you otherwise not annuitized that contract and potentially rolled those over into an IRA. Okay, so again, no, TIAA did not pay me to make this video. I don't sell TIAA products. I don't represent TIAA products, but I just see the value in lifetime income in the context of the overall financial plan. I'm not one in my practice to overdo it, but if it's an option, if a client already has an annuity or they have an appetite to purchase lifetime income and they have TI Traditional on their balance sheet, why not look at that as an option? Don't just rush to move all of your funds out of TI Traditional just because it's a little complicated and maybe you've been a little bit fed up. Okay, again, this is why I love helping folks that are in the TIAA space that have these complicated 403B accounts, because they can talk to us as independent fiduciaries and say, you know what, Kevin, what would you suggest? Here's my overall picture. Here's my 403B. Here's my brokerage account. Here's my Roth account. Here are my income goals. Here are my Social Security payments. What would you recommend I do with my TI Traditional? And so again, you need to look at it in the context of your overall financial plan, your risk tolerance, your risk capacity, your legacy goals, your liquidity needs, tax implications, all bringing it all together. I think what you'll find is more people should be taking advantage of their TI Traditional, whether they're annuitizing it, turning it into the interest-only option, or that require minimum distribution option and simply using it as a bond alternative. I believe that retirement portfolios would be better enhanced by maximizing this particular asset class if it's available to you. I hope you all found this helpful. And if you did, make sure to share this with someone else who's a TIAA participant, who's maybe approaching retirement, who's recently retired, and they're also probably scratching their head like, hey, what should I do with my TI Traditional? And if you're in that planning for retirement phase, you're over the age of 50, you've saved in excess of 7 figures, and you're looking to make work optional, you're looking to fire your boss, you're looking to maximize your retirement impact, your retirement spending, and minimize your lifetime tax bill, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, make sure to also follow our podcast. We're putting out weekly retirement related content specifically designed for you, PFR Nation. Until next week, I'll see you then.